Hi everyone, this is Enrique from the Aitor team, and I'm here with Brett and Himash to talk about GitLab flavor Markdown to get and the content editor. So this is a sort of a Q&A with Brett, who has a great deal of experience with Markdown rendering at GitLab. So we want to share with him what we've been doing in the content editor so far. He's gonna share with us historical context of GitLab flavor Markdown, and also and he's gonna ask some questions that we have about that. So I'm gonna share my screen to display the agenda and go through each point now. So I'm sharing my desktop here. So we want to start with an introduction to the content editor and what we are doing right now. So what is a content editor? What we are building now is pretty much a WYSIWYG editor to allow editing GitLab flavor Markdown. Like with a WYSIWYG experience. I have the content editor open here, and that's basically it. Like, we have some goals in the development of the content editor, UX goals and product goals. One of them that is very important for us right now is that we want to have a rich editing experience that still allows the user to type some Markdown. So if you want to go and create a header here, you can use the Markdown syntax, as well as there are other elements. I'm writing a cursive text, or I can use, like, we have like this concept of input rules that allows you like to type some Markdown and still get the rich text format in the content editor. Besides that, we have like more like the more usual rich editing tools, where you have like the toolbar and then you can select text and mark it as bold. We have like some complex editing tools for tables that is like one of the main pain points of using GFM, where you can insert a table right here, insert columns and rows. So it's like, we are trying to target part of our user base that is not as comfortable with Markdown as perhaps an engineer could be. So we are aspiring to be the default editing experience for Markdown in the GitLab application. However, we acknowledge, like, from a lot of feedback, that there is a great amount of users who would prefer actually writing Markdown directly in the source. So we don't want like to remove the source editing in GitLab, but just like provide this choice that if you want to use a WYSIWYG editor, you can do it. So you have a question here, Brett. Would you like to verbalize it?
Yeah, I was wondering if there are any plans to enhance the text editing experience. So, for example, you're building a list, and you hit enter, and it builds the next item in the list. Automatically puts the markdown in there. For text editing. I understand that's probably there for the WYSIWYG.
No, we don't have that type of plan in our roadmap. However, something that we've been discussing is that we could incorporate the source editor that is based based on Monaco, or for editing the Markdown source on that editor, and that provides IntelliSense and other tools, and I guess that could help to build that sort of user experience, right? For source editing in Markdown.
Yeah, I think so too. I was thinking the same thing.
So the next point is about how the content editor interacts with GFM, like from a technical point of view, how we load GFM into the content editor, and how we generate the Markdown back. Himanshu, I don't know if you would like to cover that aspect. Oh, you are muted.
So you mean about the serialization part?
Yeah, like taking the raw markdown compared to HTML and load it into the content editor, and the backward process, like taking that into markdown again.
Yeah, so we don't convert Markdown to HTML. We just send it to backend, and backend converts it to HTML, and then HTML is actually converted to the prose mirrors JSON format that is used to render the whatever content you see on content editor. And when you try to save it again, it is converted back to Markdown using prose mirror Markdown. It's a library that sits on top of prose mirror, and it has some of its own extensions. We are adding our own extensions on top of it, like to serialize custom elements like tables and GitLab references and all that. We already have this. We already had this in our code base for about 3 years. We are already using it for paste as markdown feature. So whenever you copy something, anything inside, like anywhere, you try to paste it inside the any text box in GitLab, it will convert everything into markdown and then paste it.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So yeah, that's pretty much the process. And recently, something that we know that is a big problem is that when we try, like when we are using the content editor. Well, let me share my screen again. And if you save this content, um, the content editor will generate this markdown from scratch. So if you are like editing an existing wiki page with some formatting, like this like formatting preferences that the content editor is not adopting, the content editor could just like rewrite all of those formatting preferences. That's like a big pain point in the user experience. So Himanshu has done some development that fixes part of that problem. I don't know if you would like to share some of it, Himanshu.
Yeah, like I don't have GDK running right now, but I can just share a basic idea of what I've come up with. So it uses these source position tags in the backend rendered markdown to compare paragraph by paragraph what you have changed. So let's say you have a huge page of markdown content and you just change one little paragraph in there, and you realize with the current content editor it will like reformat the entire document. It will forget all your line breaks, your list style types, like all your preferences are gone, and it's going to format the entire page. It's probably not the way you want it. So I use source position to figure out that whether the markdown that existed previously is the same as the markdown that was rendered. I just compared the two as ASTs, abstract syntax trees, so that and compare them together. If they are the same, I just pick the previous markdown that the user had previously, and I just discard whatever was serialized.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons, Brett, that we wanted to talk with you, because we are relying on the source map annotations that are coming in the HTML output. However, we noticed that there are parts of that HTML that are not annotated, um, because the version of common mark that we are using right now doesn't have annotation for marks, like for inline content, like
Yeah.
bold text and links. And we were thinking, like, why are we not updating our common mark version to include that? Because now there are newer versions of common mark that provide source mapping for inline elements. But yeah, that part of this call, like of asking questions about GFA implementation comes now. So do you have like any questions, Brett, about what we've talked so far about the content editor?
Uh, No, actually, you covered most of the things, and that the prose mirror does operate completely on the JSON, and then you convert it back. So that's pretty cool about doing just saving the changes at the block level. That preserves quite a bit in the markdown. So that's cool.
Yeah, yeah, we'll come to the later point about inlines as well. So yeah.
Cool.
And just an interesting bit of history. There was a little bit of a discussion early on about whether we should even have the source position stuff in there. So I'm glad we enabled it.
Yeah, I'm very glad that we kept it.
Yeah, even
So
if we did not enable it previously, we could have enabled it now because it exists anyway. Even if we want to enable source positions, we could perhaps enable some extra information by just adding some query parameter to the preview markdown URL. So
Yeah, that's true. It could have been turned on, but we use it in some other places as well in the code. So we actually use that to help track down which individual to-do item is being clicked, so that we can only update that in the markdown without re-rendering the whole page. So we actually we do utilize it as well in the code.
that's a nice point to know. So I sure read that as well. There related efforts to Markdown that we're working with the UX from the foundation team. So now the way that we display Markdown is not specified in our design system, and we are working with them on creating a specification as a Markdown type scale to make it look, not only look better, but from an accessibility point of view, also like make it easier to consume for users. So I left a link to an epic where you can, keep track of that report if you're interested. So yeah, this is now like let's jump then to the Q&A. My first question is, if you could give us like a brief overview of Markdown rendering in the GitLab application, like what is the historical context, what were the challenges, why we ended up using this bonsai pipeline.
Why did we end up using the bonsai pipeline? I can't tell you exactly why, because that existed before I even got on board. But we used to use Red Carpet for our Markdown back when I joined, and there was already a small effort that I helped accelerate a little bit to switch to commonmarker, which is very well specified, very well tested out, and all that stuff. It's still young, but it's a good base. GitHub, of course, uses it. They rebased on that as well before we did. But I mean, the one part you can say, but for the pipeline, we have to be able to add filters. We have to be able to take whatever the basic render does and apply a variety of changes to it, right? That's basically what the pipeline gives us. It gives us a set of filters for any pipeline and allows us just to go through it and, okay, we need to handle external links. We need to handle images so that they're lazy loaded. We need to do all our references and go through all those. So it gives us a linear way to really go through and do that. Not that there's probably not some, certainly some optimizations that we need to keep putting in there, and we do, but so far it's worked out pretty good.
What are the main challenges that we have on the back end for rendering Markdown right now?
What are the challenges?
Yeah, if we have different challenges.
The biggest challenge right now is references, and because they need access to the database. You need to know if what the title is for this thing. You need to know what project and all this. You need to be able to resolve some of that stuff out, as well as redacting. So we can't show confidential information to a user that doesn't have access to it. So when they put a reference in, if they don't have access to that reference, they can't see the title of it. They can't see any information about it. It's just a dead, it's just text. And that's a real critical thing. The other thing we've had is caching of user mentions and all these things, which haven't been quite as involved in, but we now try to cache those in the database so that we have some better performance and stuff like that. So that's been a big set of challenges. And then of course, adding, it's easy for us to add additional features that we can, that don't need to be parsed at the Markdown level. For example, our block quote structure, or something else, or the way we handle image tags as audio and video. If we were to add a new language construct, then that's more difficult. And we actually ran into an issue with that recently, where that's in handling escaped Markdown. So, you can, in Markdown, you can say, okay, I want a slash and an asterisk, and that won't make, and then you maybe have a word and an asterisk. Well, that won't get bolded because you had the slash. You've escaped that the bold character or the italic character. Particularly, and that works, but if you try to specify a number, so somebody says, well, this is number 23, #23, well, that ends up being a reference to an issue. Even if you put the backslash in front of it, that ends up being a reference to an issue and a link. And so we actually had to basically we had to pre-process the Markdown, run it through the common mark render, and then pre-process it again, looking for these special sequences so that we could escape a hash sign, so that we could later know, oh, this was originally escaped. We need to ignore it as a reference. So we finally just solved that problem, but they weren't. It wasn't solved in the render itself, in the common mark render.
Exactly, and that's something that I noticed while I was reading the Banzai pipeline. So we are like taking some constructs like preferences and the syntax that we use to define them, and like they are coming like from the Markdown parser as like as text within a paragraph, and then we are like extracting that from the HTML and actually processing the reference, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, the reference is just a piece of text in a paragraph or whatever, and then we're extracting and operating on that. Yes.
Like, did the team that work on maintaining this pipeline have like consider to extend the Markdown parser in the same way that GitHub extended commonmark to support those special syntaxes? I know that it is very challenging, and it makes sense not to do it if there is an easier way.
Well, there's several challenges to that. One is the common mark C mark is written in C. So you're going to be then writing additional extensions to C in C in order to provide that. And from experience, extending the parse down marker with the new language construct, it's not trivial. It's not trivial. I've done it in JavaScript with Markdown and stuff, and it becomes difficult. That would be a lot more of a burden on us than the Banzai pipeline, I believe. Certainly, you would get some performance benefits out of it, maybe. But the other thing we need to be careful of is in how we're extending the language. And sometimes we don't need to extend the language in order to provide additional functionality. And that's what we've been doing. We want to adhere very closely to the common mark specification. And as they add things, as that changes at that level, the specification level, that's the way we want to support it. And even in terms of new things, I always go back to their forum and their guys, and we look at the discussions and say, okay, what looks like the wind is going in that, in terms of that? Because the last thing I want to do is then we run off in some other direction, add a bunch of stuff, and then, oh, well, it really should be this way to maintain compliancy with common mark. We got to update everything. So I take a real interest in sticking as closely as possible to the common mark spec, even when we're adding new things.
This kind of a tangential question, but you've been following the common mark spec for a while. How often do they add new support for new features? Like, is that something that happens often? Like tables and task lists in GFM has existed for a while, and they haven't included that in common mark yet.
No, the problem with the common mark spec is it's a very slow process, which is frustrated me, is frustrated other people too. And partly they're focusing on the real core of Markdown and having that fully specified. And the extensions piece, tables, to-do lists, those kinds of things, they still consider as extensions. And they haven't, you know, everybody's always proposing, well, why can't we have it do this? And why can't we have it do that? And they've created a list of various extensions they would like to do, but would be part of the spec or be in addition to the spec. Unfortunately, it's just not moving. It's not moving very fast in terms of that. So that's an unfortunate thing about it.
Okay.
Yeah, one more thing about the tables thing is that there's a couple of table implementations, and if they move forward with one kind of table implementation, the other people who use the other table implementation, like the Markdown 8 tables, they would complain, hey, our implementation is better. Why you're not picking our implementation over this implementation? So that's why it's never going to be in the Markdown spec. It's always going to be extension.
Yeah, but of course, the real idea is that I should be able to take any piece of Markdown that's been written and move it into IA Writer, or move it into GitHub, GitLab, or you know, any of the other Markdown renderers, and be able to get basically the same output. And you can't today. And I think they're going to be going. I think they're going to stick with the GitHub table spec, simply because it is GFM is pretty much ubiquitous in the Markdown space right now. So I don't see that changing, other than maybe additional things to it, but the format I don't see it changing much. Well, I've been wrong before.
So, oh, were you going to say something, Imesh?
No, go ahead, please.
So speaking of GFM, now we are relying on this library that relies on the GFM extension of CMark. But then it seems like this GFM fork has been like I don't know if we could say stale, or it is like it has it is like it hasn't been updated to the latest contributions to the common mark implementation that has, among other things, like source map for inline elements. And we are relying on that, and we have like the same problem as a result. Like we don't have like we are not receiving these updates from common mark. So what do you think about this situation? How can we find a way of getting these common mark updates into GitLab?
Well, they have been updating CMark with the latest spec. Though it hasn't been moved up to 3.0, but No, see, oh, they did just update it. Okay. No, we need to push on the guys to get the latest stuff upgraded into commonmarker. So there are a couple other, there's another bug that I need to report to them that they're going to need that. Hopefully they'll fix, and I'll also push them on getting this updated. So I'd forgotten about the inline stuff. I'd seen that before once, but I kind of forgotten about it. And, yeah, so we definitely need to get that pushed in.
Yeah, so I had pasted a link to the inline when they actually added inline support, and that was back in 2017. So either this is already included in GFM and it's turned off by default, and we don't know about it. If that is the case, then that's great. We just need to turn it on and maybe like pass an extra query parameter, and we can turn on. I think it needs some parameters, like it needs format type to be XML, and you need to enable source positions explicitly.
I think you may be right. I think it may be in there. It's just hasn't bubbled up, in terms of real visibility yet.
Yeah. So if we can maybe pass some parameter to commonmarker to change the kind of format that you get from the backend. That would be great. So the link that I've pasted. So if you could get something like this in the link. I think I'll just share my screen. Yeah, if you could get something like this, this is very similar to what is expected from what is rendered inside Closemirror, except that instead of JSON, this is XML. So if we can get something like this and we pass this information directly to Closemirror, we can get a much closer result to what the user was had in the beginning. And if you say
that's certainly a bigger lift in terms of changing the format that we run through our pipelines and everything with, because we're running through with HTML right now. Are you the inline positioning requires XML?
I'm not sure it does, but I mean, this is an example. I think it can work with HTML as well. I'm not sure. I'm not seeing an example of HTML.
Perhaps this is just an output that CMark provides, right? Perhaps if you change that that type to HTML, it's gonna add the inline source position, but to an HTML output.
Yeah, but you can see it also has text nodes, and it has source position for the text nodes as well. But I guess we can just disregard that. But yeah, that is also somewhat important.
Which part's important?
The text nodes. The source position for text nodes right now, inline HTML, inline text is just text. It's not an HTML element. I'm not sure if it's fully possible with just Markdown, but yeah, our pipeline will get a lot stronger if we can just have inline elements as well.
Okay, that's an interesting requirement. Okay. I don't have a specific answer for that yet.
Yeah, so my question is mainly like, first question is it already there in GFM, CMark GFM? If yes, then I think we just need to get CMark see the Ruby library common marker to like maybe add support for enabling this. So yeah, so that so in this case, like most of our work is already done. And I think if the versions of like we are on like 0.29 of CMark GFM, and if the versions are already updated with upstream CMark, if CMark GFM is already upstream update with upstream of CMark, then I think it's fine. But so far, when I actually looked at it, there are lots of comments like this one that says, is the project even that active? Like there are pull requests that actually fix bugs from 2019 that no one is looking at.
Yeah.
And it's 140 commits behind and 192. I'm not sure if the comment that we want is included here, but I think I can just look it up. But yeah.
Well, CMark GFM, it is based on the 0.29 version of CMark. As far as I've found, I'll look at it again once we get off here. So my question though is, do you really need the text node? The key seems like part of the key is that as long as the bold tag and the emphasis tag and stuff like that have source position attached to them, then you may not need, then everything else falls out as text, basically, right?
Yeah.
Because everything else is surrounded with a tag, I think.
Yeah, it's good to have. If we don't have it, I think we can still work around it because it's essentially, yeah, we can still figure out what the rest of the text is because it is essentially mapping the differences of what's left. So
okay. All right, I'm sure you will too, but I'll look more into the inline source stuff and see where we're at with, and see if I can't poke those guys to start moving forward. If we need to, I mean, of course, we could always fork off of it and start doing that. That was always a consideration early on, and maybe if they're not moving it forward and putting fixes in, well, maybe we need to do that. So we'll have to decide.
yeah, I just checked it. It's already there in the CMark GFM, so we are good. Yeah. So I guess we just need to ping. That's a great update actually. So I just think we need to ping them to add support for it. I think if they already have support for it, we just need to enable it in our backend.
Yeah.
Somehow.
All right. Cool.
Yeah. Even knowing the status of the GFM project would be useful, right? It can help us to make a decision on that. Cool. So let's jump to the next question. So obviously, after finding those requirements and like wanting to use source position for inline elements and seeing how dated the GFM project is, we were wondering like, oh, maybe we can implement a GitLab flavor Markdown render in the client, and right, there are other benefits besides source positioning. Like it could be a huge performance win. Like we are just like moving the entire rendering process to the client. However, I know that there are challenges. That there are like big challenges, and I know that references is one of them. And I was wondering, what are your thoughts on it? Have you considered it before? And have you played with that idea on your own? Like, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll be just back in like 2-3 minutes.
Okay. Um, yeah, we have thought a little bit about it. I mean, some of the big challenges is what I mentioned before is the database access. And, you know, dealing with the references, dealing with redaction. So those have to be handled. You might have to then still query into the back end to resolve those issues, you know. Or there might be some other solution, but I haven't come across it yet. So yeah, those are some of the big challenges. Also maintaining two rendering streams is also a challenge. You know, I don't think we can completely get rid of the bonsai piece unless you're going to set up a node server to deal with API requests and all that kind of stuff. So now we're managing a Markdown pipeline. We're managing the backend pipeline and all that kind of stuff, and they got to stay pretty good in sync. But personally, I've done rendering on the front end using Markdown in personal projects, and then it was structured in such a way that I could then take it and run it through a small bonsai pipeline as well to do. Believe it or not. So it's doable. It's doable.
So what do you think about, like, I've been thinking about this references problem. I was wondering if we could have some sort of pre-processing step for the Markdown. Imagine that we take a Markdown file, a Markdown source file, and we find the reference definitions within the Markdown, and we just convert them into URLs if a user has access to that information.
Mhm.
And then we send that Markdown source, and you know, we don't have to do reference processing in the client because those references were pre-processed in the backend. However, the Markdown was not rendered.
Mhm. So handle all the referencing on the Markdown source, not on the HTML tree that's returned.
That's right.
That might work. That might work. Can't think of anything right now. I mean, other than the way we parse it, but can't think of anything specifically that would prohibit that. So that might be a solution. Yeah.
So Himanshu, one of the something that I hadn't thought before that Brett pointed out is that one challenge of implementing a GFM renderer in the client is that we would have to maintain two engines in GitLab, one in the backend and one in the client, because we probably can't get rid of the GFM renderer and the bonsai pipeline in the backend. And that's actually like a huge deal, probably even more difficult to solve than references. So how possible is that we can just have a Node.js process in the backend to render Markdown? Like, is that possible?
I mean, is that a question for
Yeah.
me?
Well, no, not necessarily. No, actually, I think probably a mix explaining to you the background of what we were talking about, and then asking that question to Brett.
So, well, are you saying how difficult would it be to have a node server running to do the rendering?
Yeah, not from a technical point of view. Probably we can actually do that relatively easy, but you know, I know that there are other political aspects of doing that and how that integrates with the GitLab architecture. So how challenging is like actually proposing that and having Markdown being processed by a Node.js renderer?
I mean, it's certainly, I don't see it. I don't see a problem in proposing it, as long as we're really thinking through the issues. And you know, its ability to, because its ability to access the database and stuff like that. I mean, one part it makes it a little more difficult for the rest of the organization to fix it, because it would be in Node and in JS, but instead of Ruby. I just assign all the bugs to you guys.
Well, there are, you know, there are front-end engineers here. We have a lot of people who write JavaScript as well.
No, that's the way it's always been done. If we can really show a performance benefit from it, that's not gonna cripple the API. It's not gonna cripple performance, all that kind of stuff. Then I think it would be worth considering.
I don't think there will be a performance benefit. I think the performance will actually degrade, because you cannot compare with the C compiler. JavaScript is definitely going to be slower than C. But the performance benefit would be moving the stuff to the front end, like offloading that stuff that the backend has been doing. Let's say if you have a 2 MB file, right now it gives you like 500 error. But if you like offload it to the front end and do it in batches, it's still possible to render depending on what kind of computer the person has.
Yeah, you can still kill their computer, but yeah.
Yeah, at least we're not killing our own servers.
Yeah. Well, it might be something where we do the initial common mark processing on the back end and pass the HTML over to Node, you know, to that render, to add all the decorations on top. We are moving to using the C version of the renderer, which we're not today, because when we did the conversion, there was a mismatch. So we use the Ruby render in common marker, but that's slower. So we're actually working on fixing that, so that we can use the C render. But there's a bug in how they render some of the code. So I gotta track down exactly whose problem it is, whether it's common marker or C mark or spec. So, but that's in progress. So that should actually be a big win on performance, at least from the back end side.
And then we can even, like, if we don't rely on common marker, we probably can update the C dependencies easier, right? We can keep up to date with C mark in an easier way.
Well, there's a couple ways. I mean, if yeah, you can. I mean, if we, you know, Markdown is common mark compliant. There's a reference implementation, JS implementation of common mark itself. Markdown, it's got various GFM extensions and all that kind of stuff. So there's that. It's still not as fast as the C version, but it's pretty optimized. So it can be a pain to extend. There's also a Ruby version of Markdown that was ported from JavaScript to Ruby, but that's even slower. There's also Titus Worm's new one called MicroMark. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that.
Yes, yes, we are.
Yeah, we're actually using that to compare whether the new and the old Markdown are the same.
Using MicroMark or MDS?
MDS is using MicroMark internally, so yeah, we are using MDS, which depends on MicroMark.
Ah, okay. That's new. Yeah, I use MDS in in a personal project. So it's been a while since I've looked into it. So yeah, so we can go in that direction too.
Cool. So yeah, that was the last question that we had. So I don't know if you would like to add anything else to wrap up, pretty much.
No, I did want to just in general point out that we do cache a lot of HTML in the database, so we do a lot of but we cache what has been run through the pipeline in the database so that we can reserve that without reprocessing, except for redactions. So.
But let's say if someone wants to edit something, can you just like remove that cache and fetch it fresh?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand that. Sorry.
So you cache everything, let's say, and my first question is like, how long do you cache things for?
Forever. They're cached in the database. There's actually a database column which caches it. And when you edit it, it updates the cache. But if you never go edit that comment, it doesn't change, except in one condition where we update we can break the cache system wide. So when we have security problems and stuff like that, then we can, or advancements that we need to get into everything, then we bust the cache system wide. And when you load it, then it gets rerouted.
Yeah, so if we enable, like we would need a system to bust the cache before the person has started editing, because we would need the source position for inline elements and all that stuff as well.
All right, I don't understand that.
I mean, when the person is trying to edit his comment, we would want to bust the cache of like we fetch the Markdown preview at that time again. So when you fetch it again, we would want to bust the cache and fetch the fresh content, so that when you enable the inline source position feature, which we just discussed, that is already there in CMark. So we want that it works for everyone.
Well, the preview feature already doesn't use the cache. You can't.
Okay,
right?
then yeah.
You have to send the edited markdown straight down to the server, I think.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then that's great. So yeah.
I imagine that it catches in the context of a saved comment, right? The cache ID in the, like to say it in the simplest way, is that could be the issue ID of the comment ID or the MR ID.
Well, it's an actual column in the database itself. Now there are some things that are now getting cached out to Redis, which I haven't fully dived into, but in general, any markdown you've got pretty much has its own column in the database table. So when you say I'm pulling this comment or I'm pulling this issue description, the HTML has already been processed. So that HTML is served up after running through our redaction process that makes sure that there's no confidential information. So every time we display, it's not that we're running this whole bonsai thing every time. It's just in those cases where that cache has been busted.
That makes a lot of sense. Cool. So I think that we are on time. So Brett, thanks so much for giving us all of this context on GFM.
Same here. I appreciate the content editor. It looks cool. It's looking really cool. I just need to have text editing in there at the same time. So.
Yeah, we've heard this feedback from many users, and we really respect that, and we are going to provide that always. So thank you. Thanks, Himanshu.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
All right. See you.